Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Shabbat. We're up to Perek Yutet, Mishnah Gimel. Today's Mishnah should be Le'elu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbai ben Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Menuchatam beGan Eden. Amen. In the times of the Mishnah, it was considered dangerous for a child not to be washed with warm water before and after a circumcision. The Mishnah discusses how to wash the child on Shabbat. But before we begin the Mishnah, just to point out, the commentaries do explain this is no longer the case in our days, and therefore a child who is circumcised today is treated no differently than anyone else in regards to being washed on Shabbat, as Shulchan Aruch writes in Orach Chaim chapter 331, Halacha 9, and Mishnah Berurah in chapter 331, Seifkat and 31. But let us begin the Mishnah. Marchitzin et hakatan, the Mishnah says we may use warm water to wash the child who is circumcised on Shabbat, ben lifnei milah, both before the circumcision to give the child strength, uben lachar milah, and after the circumcision to help the child heal, as the Tiferet Yisrael explains. Now, although it is normally forbidden to bathe with hot water on Shabbat, like we learned in chapter 3, Mishnah 4, it is permitted for the sake of circumcision. And the commentaries explain, after the circumcision, it's permitted to wash the child because his life is in danger, and if necessary, it would be permitted even to heat water for him on Shabbat. Before the circumcision, however, the child is not yet in danger, so the reason it is permitted to wash him is because the usual prohibition against bathing on Shabbat does not apply in this case. The rabbis prohibited bathing with warm water because they were afraid that bathhouse attendants would heat water on Shabbat. Now, since a baby would never be bathed in a bathhouse before circumcision, the rabbis permitted washing him in warm water. However, since the child is not in any danger, it is forbidden to heat water on Shabbat for this purpose. If one forgot to heat water before Shabbat, the circumcision would have to be postponed, as the Ran explains. The Mishnah continues, Umzalfin alav bayad avalo bichli, and we may not wash him in the usual way. Rather, we sprinkle water on him, and even this must be done by hand, but not as would usually be done with a utensil. And the commentators explain, since sprinkling warm water by hand is enough to keep the child healthy, it is forbidden to bathe them in the normal way. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, Marchitzin et hakatan bayom hashlishi shechal liot b'Shabbat. We may use warm water to wash their child as we normally would, and we may wash him even on the third day following a circumcision if it falls on Shabbat. And the Rav explains, that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah disagrees with the Tanna Kama on 2 points. He permits washing the child both before and after circumcision as we normally would, without having to sprinkle water by hand. In addition, he permits washing the child on Shabbat even if it's the third day following the circumcision, because the child is still dangerously weak. If necessary, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says we may even heat water on Shabbat for this purpose. The Rav does point out Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Again, the Rav writes that the halacha followed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, but again, always look at Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Berurah, and obviously discuss it with your local Orthodox rabbi what to practically do on Shabbat. But let us continue in the Mishnah. Shenemar v'yi b'yom hashlishi b'yotam koavim. It says in Sefer Bereshit chapter 34, Pasuk 25, about the men of Shechem after they had been circumcised, and it was on the third day when they were in pain that we know Shimon and Levi took advantage of their weakness to attack the city. And the commentators explain this shows that even on the third day after someone is circumcised, he is still weak and in great pain. Therefore, we may wash a child on the third day following a circumcision, even if it falls on Shabbat. And again, the commentaries explain this pasuk demonstrates that someone who has been circumcised is still in great pain even on the third day. On the second day, meaning the day after a circumcision, the child would certainly be in great pain and would also need to be washed even on Shabbat, as the Rav explained earlier in chapter 9, Mishnah 3. But the pasuk is telling you even on the third day. Now, the Gemara on page 134b in Masechet Shabbat notes that the verse quoted by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is not a conclusive proof to his opinion. It may be that the men of Shechem remained in such pain only because they were adults, but infants who heal much more quickly might not still be in a danger on the third day after a circumcision. That's what the Gemara discusses over there. Now, 2 situations in which circumcision may not be performed on Shabbat because we are unsure of a child's status will now be discussed by the Mishnah. Safek, when there is a child whose ability to survive is uncertain because we are in doubt as to whether he was born in the 9th month of a pregnancy as is normal, or whether he was born during the 8th month, in which case he will not live long, God forbid, and there is no mitzvah to circumcise him, because again, the commentaries explain that in the times of the Mishnah, a child who was born during the 8th month of pregnancy was unable to live for long, so it was legally regarded as though it were not alive. So for that reason, there was no mitzvah to circumcise such a child. But nowadays, when children born in the 8th month do commonly survive, this is no longer the case, again, as the commentaries explain. That's case number one, androgynos, or an androgynos, which is someone born with both male and female organs who might not legally be considered a male and therefore might not have to be circumcised, because the commentators explain this Tana holds that the legal status of an androgynous is uncertain. We must treat such a person as being possibly male and possibly female, as Rashi explains on page 135a in Masechet Shabbat. Therefore, this Tana holds no mitzvah of circumcision applies on Shabbat. So Mishnah says, "En mechalin alav et Shabbat." We may not violate Shabbat on his behalf by circumcising him. Since we are unsure if there is a mitzvah to circumcise these children, it is forbidden to circumcise them on Shabbat, because if there is no mitzvah, it would be an unwarranted violation of Shabbat. The Rabbi Yehuda matir b'androgynous, but Rabbi Yehuda permits it in the case of an androgynous, of someone born with both male and female organs, because the Torah says in Sefer Bereshit, chapter 17, pasuk 10, circumcise for you every male, which includes every person who has male organs, even an androgynous. And Rabbi Yehuda says, since there is definitely a mitzvah to circumcise him, we may do so even on Shabbat. But again, the sages base themselves on the pasuk that says, the Rav explains the sages, they base themselves on the pasuk that says that we are to circumcise his foreskin in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 12, pasuk 3. So the emphasis on his foreskin, his, implies that someone who has only a foreskin, male organ, may be circumcised on Shabbat, but one who also has a female organ may not be circumcised on Shabbat. That's how the Rav explains it. Then Rabbi Yehuda, the Rav says the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda. And that is the end of Mishnah 3. We continue now with Mishnah 4. We know a circumcision may be performed on Shabbat only if it is the 8th day following the child's birth. A child who was not circumcised on the 8th day may not be circumcised on Shabbat, and a child who is not yet 8 days old may certainly not be circumcised on Shabbat, since there is no mitzvah to circumcise him yet, right? So a child who was not circumcised on the 8th day, you cannot decide not to do it on Shabbat, and if the child hasn't reached 8 days yet, for sure you cannot do it on Shabbat. Our Mishnah discusses someone who mistakenly performs a circumcision on Shabbat for a child who is either younger or older than 8 days. Someone who had 2 infants who needed to be circumcised, echad lamul achar Shabbat, one that he was supposed to circumcise after Shabbat on Sunday because the infant was born on the previous Sunday, ve'echad lamul b'Shabbat, and one that he was supposed to circumcise on Shabbat because Shabbat is its 8th day, v'shachach umalet shel achar Shabbat b'Shabbat, and he forgot which infant was which and circumcised on Shabbat the one who was due to be circumcised after Shabbat. This child was only 7 days old on Shabbat. Chayav, he is obligated to bring a chatat offering, a sin offering, for having desecrated Shabbat by mistake. Since this infant is less than 8 days old, there is no mitzvah to circumcise him on Shabbat, and one who does so desecrates Shabbat for no reason. And the commentators explain he has violated Shabbat because he has made a wound, like we saw in chapter 14, Mishnah 1. Now, one is not usually required to bring a chatat offering for making a wound on Shabbat, because a chatat is brought only for melacha that's constructive, while a wound is typically destructive. But in this case, however, he has done something constructive. Since the foreskin no longer has to be removed when the child turns 8 days old, he will only have to draw a token amount of blood to fulfill the mitzvah, so he has to bring a korban chatat. Echad lamul be'erev Shabbat. However, if there was one infant that he was supposed to circumcise on Friday, because the infant was born on the previous Friday, ve'echad lamul b'Shabbat, and one that he was supposed to circumcise on Shabbat, b'shachach umalet shel erev Shabbat b'Shabbat, and he forgot which infant was which and circumcised on Shabbat the one who was supposed to be circumcised on Friday. So for some reason this child's circumcision was postponed, and he may not be circumcised on Shabbat because he's 9 days old, but they did it. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatat. Rabbi Eliezer obligates him to bring a chatat offering even in this case. Rabbi Yeshua poter, but Rabbi Yeshua exempts him from a chatat. Now, although he desecrated Shabbat by circumcising the wrong infant, his mistake was made in the course of trying to do a mitzvah, circumcising the 8-day-old infant, and he did in fact perform a mitzvah by circumcising the 9-day-old infant. So because of this, Rabbi Yeshua holds that no chatat is required. And again, the commentaries try to explain Rabbi Yeshua's opinion that according to Rabbi Yeshua, if someone mistakenly violates a prohibition while trying to perform a mitzvah, and he in fact performs a mitzvah, he does not need to bring a chatat offering. In the first case of the Mishnah, however, Rabbi Yeshua agrees that someone who mistakenly circumcises a 7-day-old child must bring a chatat offering, because although his mistake was also made while trying to do a mitzvah, he did not actually perform any mitzvah, because the Rav says one cannot fulfill the mitzvah of circumcision before the child is 8 days old. And the Gemara on page 137a in Masechet Shabbat cites a pasuk from the Torah for Rabbi Yeshua's ruling. And the Rav says, the Rav does tell us, V'alachak Rabbi Yeshua, that Rabbi Yeshua, that in this case he would be exempt from a chatat offering. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.